There are moments in life when silence screams louder than words, when the sound of a closing door feels like thunder inside your chest, and when the person you built your world around walks away without looking back. That's how Elena's story began, not with a fight, not with a storm of words, but with quiet, unbearable stillness. The morning had started like any other. The pale sun crept through the cracked curtains, brushing against the peeling walls of their small house on the edge of Willowmere, a town so quiet that even pain echoed through its streets. Elena stirred the pot of tea, her hands trembling just slightly, though not from the morning chill. Across the wooden table sat her husband, Daniel Carter, his eyes fixed not on her, but on the folded piece of paper before him. His jaw was tight, his silence heavy. "Daniel," she said softly, forcing a smile, "your tea's getting cold." He didn't answer. Instead, he took a deep breath, the kind that feels final, and pushed the letter toward her, her heart stilled. "What's this?" He stood, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Elena. I can't do this anymore." Her voice cracked. "Can't do what?" "This life," he said, his tone hollow. "This small town. The struggles. The sameness. I thought I could live like this, but I can't. I'm leaving." The words cut deeper than any blade. "Leaving?" she whispered. "Where will you go?" He hesitated. "There's someone waiting for me in the city. Her name's Claire." "I didn't mean for it to happen," but Elena didn't let him finish. Her body froze, her lips trembled, but her tears refused to fall, as if even they were too shocked to believe him. "You promised me, Daniel," she said in a voice barely audible. "You promised to stand by me through everything." Daniel's gaze flickered, guilt, shame, but not enough love to stay. "I'm sorry," he repeated, before turning toward the door, and just like that, he was gone. No storm followed. No screaming. Just silence, the kind that lingers deep, cold, and cruel. For hours, Elena sat there, staring at the empty chair across the table. The tea had gone cold. The clock ticked endlessly. The letter, the one he'd left behind, lay open beside her trembling hand. He had written, "You're stronger than you think, Elena. You don't need me." But she didn't feel strong. She felt hollow, like a house abandoned by light. The small town of Willowmere was merciless with whispers by sunset. Everyone knew at the market. Women lowered their voices when she passed. Men avoided her eyes. Old Mrs. Alden, her neighbors, sighed and muttered, "Poor thing." Left all alone, Elena smiled faintly at their pity. She didn't want sympathy, she wanted silence. She walked home with her shawl pulled tight, the evening breeze carrying laughter from other homes, laughter that once belonged to her too. Inside her small cottage, she lit the oil lamp and sat by the window, staring out at the vast, dark fields. She could almost hear Daniel's voice, the promises he once whispered under these very stars. "One day, I'll build you a house big enough to hold all your dreams." Now, even their tiny home felt too large for her. Loneliness. Days turned into weeks. Elena stopped expecting him to return. She stopped waiting for footsteps outside the door. She learned that heartbreak wasn't one moment, it was 1,000 small moments that followed each time she saw his empty chair. Each time she woke up and reached for a ghost. But something inside her refused to die. One morning, while drawing water from the well, she overheard two women whispering nearby. Her husband left her for that woman in the city. One said she should have seen it coming. The other replied, "Men like Daniel don't stay for long." Elena's hands trembled, the water spilling down her skirt. For a moment, humiliation burned in her chest. But then something strange happened. The shame turned into anger. The anger turned into strength. She looked up, her eyes clear for the first time in weeks. Maybe Daniel had left, maybe everyone pitied her, but she was still here, still breathing, still standing. And for the first time, she whispered to herself, "If no one believes I can survive, I'll show them I can do more than that." That evening, she took out a small wooden box hidden beneath her bed. Inside were scraps of fabric, thread, and old needles, the remnants of her mother's tailoring days. She remembered how her mother used to say, "A woman's hands can rebuild anything, even a broken life." Elena set the lamp closer, threaded her needle, and began to sew. At first, it was just a distraction to quiet the ache, to fill the silence. But soon her fingers moved with purpose, her stitches growing steadier with every breath. She began repairing old clothes for neighbors in exchange for bread or candles. Then, she started making her own designs, simple, beautiful pieces inspired by her mother's teachings. Word spread. The same women who had whispered behind her back now came to her door, asking Elena, "Could you make something for my daughter's wedding?" Each time she smiled, not out of pride, but out of quiet resilience. Weeks became months. Her little cottage slowly transformed. Bolts of fabric lined the shelves. A sewing machine gifted by a grateful customer stood proudly by the window, and in the evenings, the same fields that once witnessed her tears now shimmered with hope. Still, every now and then, she would hear rumors that Daniel had married Claire, that he was living a fine life in the city. The thought used to sting. Now, it only made her smile faintly because Elena had found something he never could piece one night. As she sat sewing under the lamplight, her reflection caught her eye in the window glass. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. Gone was the frightened woman who once begged a man to stay in her place. Stood someone stronger, softer, wiser, someone who had learned to build a life from ashes. She whispered, almost to the stars, "You were right about one thing, Daniel. I didn't need you. But you were wrong about the reason. I didn't survive because I was strong. I became strong because you left, and for the first time since that day," she smiled, not the fragile kind, but the kind that comes from knowing you've faced your worst and still stood tall outside. The wind carried her laughter through the quiet streets of Willowmere, a sound that no rumor could silence anymore, because the woman everyone pitied had finally built a life stronger than any man's promise. The next winter came early to Willowmere. Frost clung to the window panes like delicate lace, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and silence. Inside her cottage, Elena worked late into the night, sewing by the dim light of an oil lamp. The rhythmic click of her sewing machine filled the room, a steady heartbeat in a house that once felt lifeless. Her hands had become rough from work, but her stitches were precise, each one holding a quiet story of pain turned into purpose. She paused only when she heard a soft knock on the door. It was Sophie Miller, the baker's wife, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Elena," Sophie began shyly, holding a basket. "I brought you some bread. Warm, just out of the oven." Elena smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "You didn't have to, Sophie." Sophie hesitated, then said gently, "You've helped everyone in town these past months. It's the least I can do." Elena's eyes softened. Gratitude, something she hadn't felt in a long time, filled her chest. "Thank you." As Sophie turned to leave, she stopped at the door. "You know, Elena, people talk less now. They see how strong you are. Some even say you're a miracle." Elena chuckled softly. "A miracle? No, Sophie. Just a woman who didn't have a choice but to survive." The next morning, she walked through the town square, her shawl wrapped tight against the biting wind. Where once she used to hear whispers of pity, now she heard something different: respect. Mrs. Alden called out from her porch, "Elena, my granddaughter's wedding dress came out beautifully. You've got golden hands, my dear." And from across the street, Mr. Thompson, the blacksmith, waved. "If you ever need anything fixed, you come to me." No charge. For the first time in months, Elena felt she truly belonged again. But life, as it often does, was not done testing her. One cold evening, she found a letter slipped beneath her door. The handwriting, sharp, elegant, was unmistakable. It was Daniel's. Her heart stuttered. For a long moment she couldn't move. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter. "Elena, I heard about your work. I always knew you were talented, but I never imagined you'd make something of your own. I made mistakes more than I can count, Claire, and things didn't work out. I'll be returning to Willowmere soon. I'd like to see you, if you'll let me." Daniel. The paper fell from her hands. She stared at the flickering flame of the lamp, her breath shallow. He was coming back. The man who had broken her, the man who had left her to drown in silence, now wanted to return, as if time hadn't rewritten who she was. That night, Elena didn't sleep. Memories came flooding back, their laughter, their promises, the day he left. The ache she thought had healed reopened just slightly, whispering old doubts. Was she ready to see him again? Would he expect her to forgive him? Did she even owe him that? At dawn she stepped outside. The frost crunched beneath her feet, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and gray. She breathed deeply, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The Elena he left behind was gone. The woman standing here had weathered storms, not just heartbreak. She whispered to herself, "Let him come. I'll face him, not as his wife, but as myself." 2 days later, Daniel arrived. Elena was in her workshop when she heard the familiar sound of boots on her porch. She froze, her needles suspended mid-stitch. The door creaked open. There he stood, older, wearier, a shadow of the man he once was. His clothes were travel-worn, his face lined with regret. "Elena," he said softly, his voice cracking, "you look different." She looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Different? Maybe because I stopped waiting for you." He swallowed hard. "I deserve that." She set her sewing aside, folding her hands calmly. "Why are you here, Daniel?" "I came to say I'm sorry," he said. "I was selfish. I thought the world owed me more, but I only lost everything that mattered." Elena's eyes were steady. "And now you think you can just walk back into my life?" He hesitated. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to see if there was still a place for me here." Elena smiled faintly, not in bitterness, but in quiet grace. "There is no place for the man who left, but there might still be a lesson in the one who's returned." Daniel looked down, shame flickering across his face. "You've changed, Elena." "No," she said. "I've only become who I was meant to be, someone who doesn't need to be saved." Over the next few days, Daniel lingered in town, helping at the mill, trying to rebuild what he had destroyed. People whispered again, not about her shame this time, but about whether she'd take him back. Sophie visited one afternoon, eyes curious. Will you forgive him? Elena paused, her hands steady over the fabric. Forgiveness isn't for him, Sophie. It's for me, and I already have, not because he deserves it, but because I do. Sophie nodded, tears glistening. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. Elena smiled gently. Strength doesn't mean you don't break. It means you break and keep going anyway. One evening, Daniel appeared again at her doorstep, holding a small wooden box. I kept this, he said, opening it to reveal a faded photograph, the two of them on their wedding day. I wanted to give it back, he whispered. You should have it. Elena looked at the photo, the two young faces smiling, unaware of how cruel life could be. Keep it, she said softly. That woman doesn't exist anymore. And neither does that man, he nodded, tears brimming. Then what should I do, Elena? Start over, she said simply, like I did. But this time without breaking someone else. To find yourself. Daniel lowered his head. Goodbye, Elena, she smiled, a real peaceful smile. Goodbye, Daniel. As he walked away, she felt no pain, no anger, only release. That night, she stepped outside again, the moonlight silvering her hand. She whispered into the quiet, I thought losing him broke me, but now I see it built me. The wind carried her words across the sleeping town, a lullaby for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough, because Elena had learned that love may leave, promises may fade, but a woman's will, once awakened, can build an empire out of ruins. Spring crept gently into Willowmere. The snow melted into streams that ran like silver ribbons through the fields, and the town began to breathe again after months of quiet frost. Elena stood outside her cottage, the morning sun warming her face. In her hands she held a sign she'd spent the past week painting, its letters bold and proud, Carter Stitchworks, handmade with heart. She hung it above her door, took a deep breath, and whispered, here's to new beginnings. The little sewing room that had once been her refuge was now a proper shop. The walls were lined with shelves of colorful fabrics. The table that once held her grief now held dreams, ribbons, lace, and hand-woven dresses. First she had only a few customers, but word spread quickly across Willowmere and even into neighboring villages. People said that Elena Carter's hands could sew not just fabric, but feelings, that every dress she made seemed to hold a story, a bit of courage stitched into it. Seems one afternoon, a young girl named Lucy Parker, no older than 16, came into the shop clutching a worn-out apron. Mrs. Carter, she said softly, I heard you teach sewing sometimes. I want to learn. I don't want to marry the man my father's chosen for me. I want to work, earn my own money. Elena studied her timid eyes, calloused hands, and the same quiet desperation she once carried. Do you have a steady hand? Elena asked. Lucy nodded. I think so. Then come tomorrow, Elena said with a smile. We'll start with thread and patience, the two hardest things to master. The girl's face lit up. Thank you. As she left, Elena's heart felt lighter. She realized something profound. Her pain had not gone to waste. It had become a bridge for someone else's beginning. Soon, other women began to come. A widow who needed work, a mother trying to feed her children, a young bride who wanted to learn to make her own wedding dress. Elena welcomed them all. By summer, Carter Stitchworks had become more than a shop. It was a sanctuary. Each morning, the small room filled with the hum of sewing machines, the soft laughter of women, and the scent of lavender tea that Elena brewed every afternoon. She often told them, we're not just stitching fabric here. We're stitching our lives back together, and they believed her because they could see it in her eyes. But not everyone in Willowmere was happy about it. Some men whispered that she was turning women against tradition. Others said she was too proud, forgetting her place. Elena ignored them until one evening, the town's shopkeeper, Mr. Bryce, confronted her outside the market. Elena, he said, his tone sharp, I hear you're paying women to work for you now. Yes, she replied calmly, they earn their wages through honest work. He frowned. You're creating trouble. Husbands don't like their wives spending all day at your shop. Elena's eyes hardened. Maybe it's time they learned that a woman's worth isn't measured by how quiet she can be. Mr. Bryce scoffed. You've changed too much since Daniel left. She smiled faintly. Yes. That's what happens when you stop being someone's shadow. She walked away, leaving him speechless. That night, as the women packed up their things, Lucy lingered by the window. Mrs. Carter, she said quietly, do you ever get tired of fighting everyone's opinions? Elena looked up from her sewing. Every day. But then I remember, if I stop, someone else won't start. And that's what keeps me going. Lucy nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. I want to be like you. Elena smiled warmly. No, Lucy. Be better. Build a life so strong no one can take it from you, not even love. By autumn, Carter Stitchworks had grown beyond what Elena ever imagined. They began taking orders from towns farther away. Brides, schoolteachers, even noblewomen from the nearby city sent word requesting her work. One afternoon, a letter arrived stamped with the royal seal of Belfair Manor, a large estate 2 towns over. Mrs. Elena Carter, We have heard of your exceptional craftsmanship. Lady Rosalind of Belfair wishes to commission you to design gowns for her daughter's wedding. Payment generous upon completion. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she read it. It wasn't just work, it was validation. Proof that the woman they once pitied had become someone the world now sought. When she told the women at the shop, cheers erupted. Lucy hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it, Mrs. Carter." But Elena shook her head, smiling through tears. "No, we did. Preparing for the Belfair Commission consumed her days and nights. The fabrics were finer than anything she'd ever touched, satin that shimmered like water, lace so delicate it could tear with a sigh, but with every stitch, she thought of the women beside her, their laughter, their struggles, their dreams. This wasn't just a gown, it was a statement that women from a small town, forgotten and underestimated, could create beauty that reached beyond the walls of their world. The day she delivered the dresses to Belfair Manor, Elena stood outside the grand estate, her heart pounding. The guards led her inside, where Lady Rosalind awaited. The lady's eyes widened as she examined the dresses. "Exquisite," she murmured. "Your work speaks of heart, Mrs. Carter." Elena bowed slightly. "Thank you, my lady. It was made with more than just thread." Lady Rosalind smiled. "You remind me of myself once upon a time." And for the first time, Elena realized that strength wore many faces, some behind silk gowns, some behind sewing needles. When she returned to Willowmere, the women greeted her with tears and applause. Lucy ran to her, waving a newspaper clipping from the city. "Local artisan from Willowmere designs gowns for noble family." Elena stared at it, unable to speak. Her eyes filled with tears, but not from pride, from gratitude. The woman who had once been left with nothing had built everything. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the fields, she sat by her window with her cup of tea. The breeze rustled the curtains, carrying laughter from the shop across the yard. And for a brief, peaceful moment, she closed her eyes and whispered, not to Daniel, not to the past, but to herself, "I thought I was rebuilding my life, but what I really did was create one worth living." The lamp flickered softly beside her, its light reflecting off the golden sign outside her shop. The name Carter no longer a reminder of loss, but of legacy. Elena Carter was about to learn that strength doesn't just mean surviving heartbreak, it means surviving praise, envy, and the quiet pull of the life you left behind. Winter came early to Willowmere again that year. But this time the cold didn't scare Elena. Her shop, Carter Stitchworks, was now alive with work, warmth, and laughter. The walls echoed with the sounds of machines, women's chatter, and the rustle of fabric as gowns were packed and delivered to clients far beyond their little town. The Belfair Commission had changed everything. Orders now came in faster than she could manage. The city's elite sent carriages to her doorstep, their messengers carrying silk samples and sealed envelopes promising riches. But with success came something darker: whispers, jealousy, and the slow, suffocating weight of expectation. One snowy morning, as she reviewed new orders, Lucy burst through the door clutching a letter. "Elena, you have to see this," she said, eyes wide with excitement. Elena looked up from her sewing. "What is it, dear?" Lucy handed her a parchment sealed with a gold crest. Elena broke it open and read aloud to Mrs. Elena Carter of Willowmere. "His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne requests your presence in Belfair City to discuss a potential long-term partnership in design for the royal court. Travel and accommodation will be provided. Yours sincerely, Lady Margaret, Secretary to His Grace." The room fell silent. The women stared at her, eyes wide. "The Duke of Ashbourne?" whispered Sophie, awestruck. That's royalty." Elena felt her heart pound for a moment. She didn't know whether to smile or tremble. This was everything she dreamed of, and yet part of her hesitated because she remembered who she used to be, the woman who once waited by a door that never opened, the woman who learned that some promises are better broken. That night, as the others left, Elena stayed behind, staring at the letter. The lamp flickered, casting long shadows across her workshop. This offer could change everything, not just for her, but for the women who worked with her. But it also meant leaving Willowmere, the place that had both broken and rebuilt her. She whispered to herself, "If I go, will I lose what made me?" The next morning, she walked through the frost-covered fields, her thoughts tangled. Halfway down the lane, she saw Daniel standing outside the old mill, his hands buried in his coat pockets. He looked different now, humbler, quieter. He nodded respectfully when he saw her. "Elena," he said softly, "I heard about the Duke's offer. Everyone's talking about it." She smiled faintly. "News travels fast in Willowmere." He hesitated. "You've come far. I'm proud of you." For a moment they stood in silence, then Daniel added, "Are you going to accept it?" Elena looked at the distant horizon, where the road disappeared into mist. "I don't know. I built everything. I am here. I'm afraid if I leave, I'll lose myself." Daniel nodded slowly. "Maybe the world needs to see what Willowmere built." She studied his face, the man who once broke her now offering wisdom that strangely healed her. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time." A week later, Elena packed her things. The women gathered at the station to see her off, their eyes shining with tears and pride. Lucy hugged her tightly. "Promise you'll come back." Elena smiled. I'm not leaving forever, just long enough to show them what women from Willowmere can do. The train whistle blew. Steam filled the air as the train began to move. She looked out the window, watching her town grow smaller until it vanished completely, and for the first time in years, she felt that familiar ache in her chest, not from loss, but from growth. Belfair City was a world she'd only seen in dreams: tall marble buildings, glittering streets, women in gowns that shimmered like moonlight. Carriages clattered past grand shops with gold-lettered signs. Elena felt like a stranger in her own success. A carriage awaited her at the station. Inside sat Lady Margaret, the Duke's secretary, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with an air of command. "Mrs. Carter," she said briskly, "His Grace is expecting you at the manor. You've made quite an impression." Elena smiled politely. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Lady Margaret studied her. "You're not like most of the designers we see. They're all ambition and noisy. You seem calm." Elena looked out the window. "You learn calmness when you've lived through storms." Lady Margaret gave a rare smile. "Then perhaps that's exactly why you were chosen." When Elena arrived at Ashbourne Manor, she was led into a grand hall filled with tapestries, chandeliers, and portraits of ancestors who looked as though they'd never known a day of hardship. The Duke Edward Hawthorne, tall, silver-haired, and kind-eyed, rose from his chair as she entered. "Mrs. Carter," he said warmly, "I've heard of your work. It's rare to find craftsmanship with heart these days." Elena bowed slightly. "Your Grace, I'm honored." He gestured for her to sit. "We'd like to offer you a permanent position designing gowns for the royal court. You'd have your own studio here in Belfair." Elena's breath caught. "That's an extraordinary offer." The Duke smiled. "You've earned it," but something in his tone, or maybe the vast emptiness of that beautiful room, made her heart hesitate. She thought of the laughter in her shop, of Lucy's bright eyes, of the women whose hands had learned to shape hope through thread. If she stayed here, what would happen to them? Would Carter's stitchwork still feel like home if she wasn't there to guide it? That night, she stood at the balcony of the guest chamber. The city lights glittering below. The air was cold, the stars faint behind the fog. She whispered to herself, "I've built everything I thought I wanted, but what if what I really wanted was never this?" A tear rolled down her cheek, not from sadness, but from the weight of choice. She thought back to her mother's words, "A woman's hands can rebuild anything, even a broken life." Maybe, Elena thought, it wasn't about building bigger, but building truer. The next morning, she met with the Duke again. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I'm grateful for your faith in me, but I must decline." He looked surprised. "Decline? Mrs. Carter, do you understand what you're walking away from?" She smiled gently. "Yes, and that's why I can walk away." He studied her, not with anger, but with respect. "Then you are a wiser woman than most I've met." Elena bowed. "I only know this success means nothing if it costs you the people who helped you find it." The Duke nodded slowly. "Then take this, Mrs. Carter, not as payment, but as acknowledgement." He handed her a velvet pouch. Inside was a silver brooch shaped like a needle and thread, engraved with her name. "A reminder," he said, "that the crown doesn't always belong on a head. Sometimes it belongs in the hands that create." When Elena returned to Willowmere weeks later, the women gathered around her, cheering. Lucy cried openly. "You came back?" Elena laughed through her tears. "Of course I did. This is where my heart lives." Sophie asked, "Did you bring anything from the city?" Elena smiled and opened the pouch, revealing the brooch. "Just a little reminder that our work matters even to those who live in castles." That evening, as the lamps glowed in her workshop and the air filled with the hum of sewing once again, Elena realized something profound. She didn't need the world stage. She already had one right here. And every woman who walked through her door was part of her legacy, because in the quiet rhythm of needles and thread, they weren't just mending cloth, they were mending themselves. The years that followed Elena's return from Belfair City were kind to Willowmere. The town, once small and somber, had begun to change, not because of new roads or buildings, but because of a quiet revolution that began in a tiny sewing shop on the corner of Rosewood Lane. Carter Stitchworks was no longer just a local shop. It had become a school, a place where women came to learn, to work, and to remember who they were before the world told them who to be. Every morning, the air was filled with the soft hum of machines, laughter, and the familiar rhythm of scissors snipping through fabric. Elena stood at the center of it all, her silver-streaked hair tied neatly back, her hands still steady despite the years that had passed. Lucy, now 20, worked beside her, teaching a new group of apprentices. "Elena," Lucy said one morning, laying a bright blue fabric across the table, "this color, it's the one Lady Belfair requested." Again, she said, "Your designs made her daughter feel alive on her wedding day." Elena smiled faintly. "Clothes can't give life, Lucy, but they can remind us that we deserve to feel beautiful." Lucy nodded, her eyes full of quiet admiration. "You've taught me that beauty isn't in what we wear. It's in how we carry what tried to break us." Elena paused for a moment, the words sinking deep into her heart. There it was, proof that her story hadn't just healed her. It had started to heal others too. That afternoon, a small crowd gathered outside the shop. The mayor of Willowmere, Mr. Halden, stood on the porch, Holding a parchment Elena Carter, he said proudly on behalf of the town council, "It's my honor to recognize your contribution to Willowmere. Your work has given dignity and purpose to dozens of families. We hereby name this Lane Carter Row in your honor." The crowd erupted into applause. Elena blinked back tears. Her hand over her heart. "Carter Row," she whispered. "I never imagined." Lucy nudged her gently. "You deserve it." Elena shook her head with a smile. "No, we deserve it." Every woman who dared to believe she could start again. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Elena sat alone in her shop. The lamps flickered softly, casting a golden glow over the walls that were now filled with framed photos of smiling apprentices, finished gowns, and moments she had once thought she'd never live to see. Her hands rested on the sewing table, tracing the scratches and worn spots in the wood, the silent witnesses of her journey. She whispered to herself, "You've done enough. You can rest now." But even as she said it, a part of her knew her purpose wasn't finished yet. A few weeks later, a stranger came to Willowmere, a young woman in her mid-20s with city clothes and eyes that carried the same loneliness Elena once knew. "Are you Mrs. Carter?" she asked timidly. Elena smiled. "I am. And you are?" "My name's Clara Benson." The woman said, "I read about you in a newspaper. They said you help women start over." Elena gestured for her to sit. "What is it you want to start over from?" Clara's voice trembled. "My husband died last year. Everyone keeps telling me to remarry. But I want to build something. My own shop. Maybe I heard you could teach me." Elena looked at her for a long moment, not with pity, but with understanding. "My dear," she said softly, "you came to the right place. What we build here isn't just made of thread and cloth. It's made of courage." Clara nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Elena reached out, placing her wrinkled hand over Clara's. "Strength isn't something you have. It's something you find when you have no choice." Clara joined the workshop, and in time she too began to laugh again, sewing, learning, and slowly finding her rhythm. Elena watched her and saw herself in every movement, the hesitation, the quiet determination, the growing light in her eyes. One day, Lucy whispered to Elena, "She reminds me of you." Elena smiled softly. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe the world sends us the people we once were so we can show them the way we wish someone had shown us." The years passed gently, the seasons came and went, and the woman who was once left behind by love had now become the reason dozens of women believed in their worth again. But even as her legacy grew, Elena's body began to slow. Her fingers ached after long hours of sewing, and her steps became shorter, softer. Lucy began to notice Elena. She said one afternoon, "You've done enough. Let us handle the work now." Elena smiled faintly. "Oh, Lucy. The day I stop working, my heart will stop beating." Lucy sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Then at least rest once in a while." Elena nodded, but they both knew she wouldn't. One spring morning, Elena stood outside Carter's Stitchworks as the sun rose, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. The same fields that once watched her weep now glowed with the laughter of young girls learning to dream. She whispered to the wind, This is what you left me for, Daniel. And I'm grateful you did." It wasn't bitterness, it was peace, because she finally understood that some heartbreaks are not punishments, they're directions. That evening, she called Lucy and Clara to her home. "I have something for you both," she said, handing them a small leather-bound notebook. Inside were years of sketches, fabric notes, and lessons written in her delicate handwriting. "I want you to continue Carter's Stitchworks," she said softly. "Teach others what you've learned, not just how to sew, but how to start again." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "Elena, don't talk like you're leaving." Elena smiled, her voice calm. "We all leave, Lucy. But not all of us leave something behind. I just want to make sure mine stays in good hands." That night, after they left, Elena sat by the window, the same one where she once waited for a husband who never returned. Now she waited for something gentler, not for someone to come back, but for the world to move on, knowing she had done her part. The moonlight bathed her sewing table, her silver brooch gleaming quietly beside the lamp. She picked it up, tracing the engraved words. "Elena Carter." She smiled to herself and whispered, "You built a life stronger than any man's promise. And now it will outlive even you." Winter had returned to Willowmere, bringing with it a soft blanket of snow that quieted the town. The laughter of children echoed faintly through the lanes, and from Carter's Stitchworks, warm light spilled into the cold night. Elena sat by the window of her small house, her shawl draped around her shoulders, the sewing machine beside her. Once her heartbeat now rested, covered with a sheet of lace. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a cup of tea, the steam curling into the air like whispers of memory across the room. Lucy sat by the fire, sorting through Elena's old sketchbooks. "Your handwriting hasn't changed," she said softly. Elena smiled. "That's because my hands remember even when my heart forgets." Lucy chuckled gently, then her tone softened. "You should rest. Elena, you've done enough." Elena turned toward her, her eyes gleaming like candlelight. "Rest?" she said with a faint smile. "You rest when your story is finished. Mine still has one last stitch to make." That night, when the world slept, Elena took out an old wooden box, the same one she hadn't opened in years. Inside lay a collection of letters tied with a faded ribbon, yellowed at the edges. Some were from customers, thanking her for her kindness. Others were from women she had taught, sharing their new lives and businesses. But at the bottom, beneath the pile, was an unopened envelope addressed in a handwriting she knew too well. To Daniel, it said. She had written it years ago, the night after he left, but she had never sent it. Her fingers brushed against the paper, and she felt a strange calm. She untied the ribbon and unfolded the letter, her eyes misting over as she began to read. Dear Daniel, you left without saying goodbye, but life didn't stop asking me questions after you were gone. It asked who I was without your name beside mine. It asked what a promise meant when it was broken. And it asked if I could still believe in love when love had forgotten me for years. I thought the answers lived with you, that if I could just understand why you left, I would be free. But I was wrong. The answers weren't with you. They were waiting for me in every sunrise, every tear I wiped alone, every dress I sewed for someone who reminded me that beauty can grow from pain. You left me empty, Daniel, but emptiness is where I found myself. You promised me forever, but forever came from the life I built after you. And though you may never read this, I want you to know, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I do. You took my heart, but I took it back. And now it beats stronger than your promises ever did. Elena, she folded the letter gently and placed it back inside the box. There was no bitterness in her heart, only peace, the kind that comes when you've finally told the truth to yourself. The next morning, Lucy arrived early at the shop. She noticed the lights in Elena's house were still on. Elena? She called, knocking on the door. No answer. When she entered, she found Elena sitting in her chair by the window, her silver brooch pinned to her chest, a faint smile on her lips. The letter box rested beside her hand. Lucy froze, her breath trembling, tears already blurring her vision. Elena, she whispered, her voice cracking. She reached for her hand. It was still warm, soft, peaceful. Elena had passed quietly, just as she had lived, with grace, with purpose, and with peace in her soul. The funeral was held 3 days later. People came from every corner of Willowmere, women she had taught, children she had helped, families whose lives she had touched. Lucy and Clara stood together, reading the inscription on her gravestone. Elena Carter, the woman who taught us that broken isn't the end, it's the beginning. Tears flowed freely, but so did pride. A week later, Lucy opened the wooden box that had been found beside Elena. Inside, she found one final note addressed to her. My dearest Lucy, if you are reading this, it means my hands have finally rested. But my dream must not. Keep Carter Stitchworks alive, not as a business, but as a refuge. Every woman who enters should leave believing she can write her own story, no matter who once erased it. And when you feel lost, look at the morning light through the shop window. That's me reminding you that love doesn't end. It changes its form. Yours always, Elena. Lucy pressed the letter to her heart. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, revealing the first buds of spring. She looked up at the sky and whispered, you didn't just build a life stronger than a man's promise, Elena, you built a world. When a woman dies, her voice doesn't fade, it echoes in the choices of those she taught to believe again. Elena Carter was gone, but her story had only just begun to speak. And what she left behind wasn't just a legacy. It was a movement, stitched together by every woman who had ever refused to stay broken. Spring breathed new life into Willowmere, painting the fields in gold and green. The snow had melted, but a different kind of warmth lingered, one born not from the sun, but from memory. Everywhere Lucy went, people spoke her name with reverence. Mrs. Carter changed my life. She taught my daughter to sew. She made me believe in myself again. It was strange, Lucy thought, how one woman's quiet strength had rewritten the soul of an entire town. The morning after Elena's funeral, Lucy unlocked Carter Stitchworks for the first time without her. The key turned with a click that felt heavier than ever before. Inside, the air still smelled like lavender and cotton. The sunlight poured through the lace curtains, just as it always had. Elena's chair sat empty, her scissors neatly placed on the table. Lucy walked over, her eyes wet, and whispered, don't worry, Elena. I'll keep it alive. I promise. Word spread quickly, not of Elena's death, but of what she had lived for. Soon, women from neighboring towns began to arrive. Some were widows, some divorced, some simply lost. Each of them carried a story, and each left a little lighter after walking through the doors of Carter Stitchworks. Lucy and Clara worked tirelessly. They expanded the workshop, teaching new skills: embroidery, pattern design, even small business lessons. They renamed the program the Carter Foundation for Women, not for glory, but for gratitude. One afternoon, as Lucy was guiding a group of newcomers, a journalist from the Willowmere Gazette arrived. He looked around in awe at the dozens of women sewing, laughing and sharing stories. I've heard about this place, he said, about Elena Carter. They say she turned grief into gold. Lucy smiled. She didn't turn grief into gold. She turned it into hope. The reporter nodded, writing the words down carefully. May I ask what's her story? Lucy's hand stilled on the fabric for a moment. She saw Elena again the way she used to hum softly while stitching. The quiet strength in her eyes, so she told him from the day her husband left to the night she took her last breath. The journalist listened in silence, then said, "That's not a story. That's a revolution." A month later, the article was published. The seamstress who sewed strength into a town. The piece spread far beyond Willowmere. Soon, letters poured in from women across the country, women who had read about Elena and found pieces of themselves in her story. Some wrote to say thank you, others wrote to ask how to start their own workshops, and slowly, the Carter Foundation grew, one stitch, one heart, one town at a time. One afternoon, Clara walked into the shop holding a small package. "Lucy, you'll want to see this," she said, handing it over. Inside was a framed certificate the National Guild of Craftswomen had awarded Elena Carter, posthumously, the Heart of Humanity Award for her contribution to women's empowerment through craftsmanship. Lucy gasped, tears welling in her eyes. She would have never believed this, she whispered. Clara smiled. "That's because she never did it for recognition." Lucy nodded. She did it so no woman would feel as alone as she once did. They placed the certificate on the wall right above Elena's old chair. Underneath it, Lucy wrote a small plaque. She stitched love where life had torn. The years continued to pass. Carter's stitchworks expanded into new towns, led by women Elena had once taught. Workshops appeared in villages where women had never been allowed to work before. Girls who once hid their dreams began to wear them proudly, and everywhere the name Carter appeared, it stood for resilience. One day, a young woman named Grace arrived at the Willowmere shop. She couldn't have been older than 20. She carried a notebook and looked around in awe at the framed photos. Elena with her apprentices, the shop's first machines, the day Carter Row was named. "Is this where it all began?" she asked softly. Lucy smiled, brushing her hands on her apron. "Yes. Right here in this very room." Grace nodded. "I'm writing a book," she said, "about women who changed the world quietly. You're Mrs. Carter, she's one of them." Lucy's eyes shimmered. She'd laugh if she heard that. She never believed she changed the world. Grace smiled. "That's exactly why she did." That evening, Lucy sat alone in the shop after everyone left. The light fell gently across the sewing tables. She looked up at Elena's picture and whispered, "They'll write your story now, Elena. The world will finally know what love looks like when it refuses to die." A few months later, Grace's book was published. Its title was simple but powerful. Stronger than any promise, the Elena Carter story. It became a quiet phenomenon in women's circles, schools, and workshops. Her story was shared not as a tale of tragedy, but as a manual for courage. And though Elena was gone, her name lived in every woman who read her words and decided to stand up again. Years later, Lucy grew old. Her hair turned silver like Elena's once had. One afternoon, she visited the cemetery where Elena rested. The grass was green and soft. Wildflowers grew around the gravestone. She placed a small spool of golden thread on the grave and whispered, "We did it, Elena. You didn't just build a life stronger than a man's promise, you built a world where women no longer needed one." The wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of lavender. And in that moment, Lucy felt it, the familiar warmth of her friend's presence. Soft as a whisper, strong as a heartbeat. Some stories end with a goodbye, but Elena Carter's story was never about endings. It was about beginnings disguised as loss. And even long after she was gone, her name lived where it always belonged, in the hands and hearts of those she taught to rise. 40 years had passed since the first light flickered inside Carter Stitchworks. The little shop on Carter Row no longer looked small. It had grown into a foundation, a movement, and now, a center of learning for women from all over the country. The sign outside had changed only once. It now read the Elena Carter Institute, where every thread tells a story. Inside the halls, hundreds of girls stitched their first patterns, learning not just how to sew, but how to dream. And among them was Elena's great-granddaughter Amelia. Amelia was 20, bright-eyed and curious. She had grown up hearing the name Elena Carter like a lullaby, but she had never truly understood it, not until now. Every day, she passed by the old photograph that hung in the main hall. Elena, standing in front of her sewing table, a faint smile on her lips, and a fire in her eyes. Below the picture were words engraved in gold. She built a life stronger than any man's promise. Amelia would stop there every morning, tracing the carved letters with her fingers. She often wondered what kind of pain her great-grandmother had endured, and how she had turned that pain into something so eternal. One afternoon, after her class ended, Amelia wandered into a locked room at the back of the institute. The caretaker had left the key hanging by mistake. Curiosity tugged at her. She turned the key, and the door creaked open. Inside was a small, preserved museum, the original Carter Stitchworks room, the same sewing tables, the same wooden box. Even the faint scent of lavender still lingered on the main table, lay a glass display case. Inside it was Elena's silver brooch and a faded letter titled "To the women after me." Amelia's breath caught. She leaned closer to read. "To the women after me, if you are holding this letter, then the world has already changed in ways I never saw coming. You may not know my voice, but you carry my story in your hands. When I was younger, I believed strength meant never falling apart, but now I know true strength is what happens after you do. If life ever leaves you behind, don't chase what broke you, build something that heals you and let others find shelter in it. Because promises will fade, but purpose will not. And if my story reaches you, let it remind you. You are not what you've lost, you are what you've become because of it. With love." That time can't erase Elena Carter. Tears blurred Amelia's eyes. She pressed her palm against the glass as if she could touch the woman whose courage had made her world possible. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, notebook in hand, and began to write. She didn't realize it yet, but those pages would become a new book, Threads of Fire, The Women of Carter Row. Years later, Amelia stood on a grand stage in London. Holding that book in her hands, the hall was filled with women from across the world, designers, teachers, survivors, dreamers. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the same black and white photo of Elena Carter. Amelia's voice trembled as she began her speech. "My great-grandmother taught us that when life unravels you, you don't stop, you weave yourself into something stronger. She began with nothing but a needle and her will. And because of her, I and thousands like me stand here with everything." The audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, crying. In that moment, Elena's story, once whispered in a small village, echoed across the world. After the ceremony, Amelia visited Willowmere. Now a preserved heritage town, Carter Row still stood quiet and golden under the evening sun. She walked into the old house where Elena had lived, the one with the window that faced the fields. Dusty light filtered through the curtains, dancing across the furniture. She sat by that window, just as Elena once had, and whispered, "I hope you can see this, great-grandma. You didn't just build a life, you built a future." A soft breeze swept through the room, the lace curtain fluttered, and for a fleeting moment, Amelia felt a warmth on her shoulder, gentle, reassuring, like a touch from someone who had never truly left. That night, before leaving Willowmere, Amelia placed something on Elena's grave, the same silver brooch, polished and shining again. She whispered, "Your thread never broke, Elena, it just kept weaving through us, through time, through every woman who refused to stay silent." The moon rose high above the fields, its light spilling over Carter Row, over the workshops, the laughter, the dreams. And somewhere, perhaps in that eternal silence beyond the stars, a woman's voice whispered softly, "Promise kept."